Okay, hi guys. This is Gaming with Alston, and today, on episode 141 of Pyramid City. Shoplifting, there are multiple reasons why people would shoplift. One factor could be Prader-Willi syndrome. Prader-Willi syndrome is known to drive patients into shoplifting, just to try to satisfy their insatiable hunger. It's not their fault that they didn't shoplift because they wanted to. In cases of Prader-Willi syndrome, all the food would have to be locked up to make sure patients don't eat themselves to death. And over in the UK, there are a specialized type of homes called Gretton homes. And it's a cruel irony of PWS that they actually need fewer calories despite their insatiable appetite. This is because of poor muscle tone. Right now, the only way to prevent them from eating themselves to death is to lock up all the food. Strict supervision with food. Strict supervision when it comes to food can prevent people from eating themselves to death. Kind of like the man who ate himself to death because, quote, he wanted to be with his father. After his father was his best friend. He couldn't deal with it anymore, so he decided to end up taking his own life. Not by guns, not by using a gun, but by eating himself to death. That's one pretty unusual way of doing it. That's one very unusual method of suicide. Muscle tone affects the production of a hormone hormone called adiponectin. Parents of children with Prader-Willi syndrome often know something's wrong at or shortly after birth, or sometimes even before birth. Because babies are supposed to be moving around in the uterus. But if the baby's not moving around, that means there's something wrong. That means there is something wrong with the baby. Thanks to modern technology, we can actually diagnose a lot of those genetic disorders before birth. And PWS is a very cruel disorder. There's a gland that lies in your brain that controls appetite and behavior. It's called the hypothalamus. Your hypothalamus tells you to stop eating or drinking when you've filled up. But in people with Prader-Willi syndrome, it cannot do that because it is defective. Which means the hypothalamus cannot respond to leptin because of a genetic defect. One of the genes on chromosome 15. Chromosome 15. It only happens if the father carries the defect, is a carrier of the defect. It gets passed on to the child. What we need are laws that make it compulsory to test your child for genetic diseases. Like that. Because compulsory genetic testing can save so many lives. Genetic testing can save so many lives. And it could also improve the quality of life of those affected by the genetic disorder. And it's not just Prader-Willi syndrome that causes poor muscle tone. There's another disease out there that can also that is a lot more common than Prader-Willi syndrome. Cerebral palsy. That can also cause poor muscle tone, to the point your muscles become stiff. That's how bad the hypotonia is in those with CP. Like, that's how bad it can get. Before we had genetic testing for Batten disease, some of the cases were some of them were misdiagnosed as autism and CP and or cerebral palsy. But the difference between CP and Batten disease become pretty obvious. With Batten disease, it worsens as it progresses. There's another disorder that is even more rare than both Batten disease and Prader-Willi syndrome. It's called fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. One obvious sign of it is malformed toes. That is actually a pretty obvious sign of fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. That's a pretty obvious sign of FOP. It's also known as Stoneman disease. Because it literally turns all your skeletal muscles into bone. It literally turns all your skeletal muscles into bone. And possibly even your involuntary muscles. Those with FOP definitely should not be lifting weights. That is because the breakdown of the muscle tissue could create even more bone. That's how bad the disorder is. Unfortunately, there is no way to prevent it, nor there is a way to treat it. It is a birth defect in the body's repair mechanism. It is a birth defect that affects the body's repair mechanism. Those with Down syndrome, aka trisomy 21, that is what it was called before it was given a name. One obvious sign of Marfan syndrome is you can't gain weight, because your body cannot store fat. Marfan syndrome. And patients are usually really tall. Patients are usually very tall. Like, usually almost 7, like, if undiagnosed, almost 7 feet tall. If untreated, patients end up reaching about 7 feet tall. That's really tall. But you know, nature... Aborting a pregnancy is simply because it has a genetic disorder. That's discrimination. There are treatments to genetic disorders. A chemical pregnancy is a miscarriage that happens in the first trimester of pregnancy. It usually happens in the It's a miscarriage that happens in the first trimester. Medical conditions that could result in a chemical pregnancy might include Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome. In fact, most people who have Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome often die before they're born. And it's caused by a defect in the gene 7-dehydrocholesterol reductase that allows the production of 7-dehydrocholesterol reductase. About 1 out of 25,000 live births will be a Smith-Lemli-Opitz baby. Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome is very rare. For those who do make it to birth, most of them die who do make it to birth often die shortly after. Most live births with Smith-Lemli-Opitz, most of them, the live births, most of them often die shortly after. The disorder causes a toxic accumulation of something called 7-dehydrocholesterol. And every adult who is alive, there's a good chance they do not have it. Because most people with Smith-Lemli-Opitz syndrome die before they're born or shortly after birth. Those with fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva should be... The reason they should be put on disability is a lot of the jobs require somewhat strenuous activity to your muscles. That wouldn't be good if you have Fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. Something as simple as a sunburn can turn into a flare-up. And surgery to remove the bone will only result in explosive bone growth. This is how bad the disorder is. There's probably only about 3,750 known cases. Worldwide. An attempt at pregnancy in those with FOP could often end up putting a mother's life at risk. Because it requires pushing with your to give birth. It kind of requires pushing extreme contraction of the vaginal muscles. Like, it puts strain on the muscles within the vagina. That'd create a vaginal flare-up in those with FOP. Like, in the women who have FOP. Which is why most patients with FOP often cannot or choose not to have kids. Because the pregnancy could put their life at risk. If they're pregnant, there's a good chance that they're fucked. Because even attempting abortion would create abdominal flare-ups. In FOP, there's no way to prevent a flare-up, because some of them can be sudden. Like, even without the injury, it could still happen. There's a famous case with a woman named Ashley Kerpeel. At first, it was misdiagnosed as infantile fibromatosis. Then they chopped her right arm off, leaving her with only her left arm remaining. Then, her right arm started flaring up, despite the amputation. Then, it came to the conclusion that she had FOP. Fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva. Schwarzman-Diamond syndrome is another disorder featured in mystery diagnosis. People born with it often have primordial dwarfism. And they end up becoming immunocompromised. Their excrement smells pretty fatty. Like, and kind of rancid. Anyways, this should be it for episode 141 of Pyramid City. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more. This is Gaming with Dalston signing off. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And subscribe to my channel for more content like this. And as always, this is Gaming with Dalston signing off. And stay tuned for more. Thank you for watching. And stay tuned for more.